Hola, 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 amigos, players, playerettes, dudettes, everybody in between. Welcome back. This is the follow-on episode to last week with Rick Prado on the 22nd anniversary of 9/11. We had a theme going here. We wanted to follow through on this next theme, and we'll tell you about that here in just a second. But first of all, welcome. As always, I'm here. I'm Morgan. I'm here literally with my partner in crime.
Yo, y'all, it's Murph.
And we're going to do what we did last time. I know some of you guys like small town police blotter, but we just couldn't bring ourselves to do that when we're talking about something as serious as, when we talked about 9/11. And then this month we're talking with Eric McBride. He retired as the chief of police in San Bernardino City. If you guys remember, Alex Collins we had on was a deputy with San Bernardino County. His partner was killed, Jamie McBride. He was wounded by a piece of shit. We don't even want to mention his name. But this is we're getting into now the December 2015 terrorist attack at the city of San Bernardino. 14 people killed, I think 27 wounded, and it just didn't seem right to follow on. We wanted to have a couple serious discussions, so that's kind of what it was. So. Before we get started, though, just a couple quick things. Head on over to Apple, Spotify, hit those 5 stars. Let us know what you thought of last week's episode. Let us know what you think of this week's episode. And don't worry, folks, next week we'll get back into Small Town Police Blotter. Also, head on over to our website, gameofcrimespodcast.com, our book from our prior guest, Rick Prado. You'll see that up there, Black Ops, The Life of a CIA Shadow Warrior. Great reading. You just got to get it. We've got everything you need there. Follow us on social media at Game of Crimes on Twitter, at Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook and the Instagram. But follow us on Patreon too. Patreon.com/Game of Crimes. We just recorded some great episodes. You can't make this shit up. We've got 911, Case of the Month. One rule we made is Murph never gets to pick a movie again. He has to submit it for review before we review it.
I promise to do better in the future.
You will, because you're on the hook for next month. All right. But guys, we have a lot of good stuff over there. Everything about, we get into funny stuff. We get into serious stuff. Our Case of the Month has been recommended by you, the listeners out there. So head on over there, patreon.com/Game of Crimes. Now, this is a show about crime. We normally are fun and jovial, because this is a show about crime. We talk about bad people doing bad things and bad people doing bad things to good people. We take the story seriously, and that's how we're going to do it. This is not about us having fun and joking at the expense of a serious incident like this. So, right. Murph, our next guest, Eric McBride, like we said, retired as the chief of police, worked his way up from patrol officer, started off as a Marine, formerly on active duty. He's got some good stories there, but he comes to us through another long list of people, a family of service, the McBrides out in California.
He does. Our good buddy out in San Diego, Mel Sosa, made an introduction for us, got us to Eric. But the McBride family is well known in the law enforcement circles out there. His brother Jamie, his niece Tony, and then Jamie's other daughter are all police officers out there that have experienced violence that, most cops in the United States don't have to experience. I'm not sure what's going on with the McBride family here, but you know what? They don't shy away from it, and they don't run away. They address the issues as they come to them, and they're protecting their communities. Eric here was just the fact that, he's a trendsetter. You're going to hear him talk about his high school career, getting out of high school early so he could join the Marine Corps early. And his whole life is service to his community and his fellow man. And in my book, there's no greater calling that you're willing to dedicate your life to work for the public. A public servant, I think, is a term of a hero, and that's certainly who we have on here today.
And I'll tell you, again, we got to thank our buddies out there, Southern California Gang Conference, Mel Sosa, all of those people. They're brothers to us. They get us great guests, which are gifts for things like this. And I'll tell you, you've really got to sit down and listen to this, because one of the things that's going to come out of this is stuff that has not really been talked about in the media before, and you'll hear him talk about a call that was received. Mm-hmm. He's been briefing this to law enforcement. On the day of, he was the, quote, deputy incident commander, but he was the incident commander for all intents and purposes. Right. And so he's not the one at the tip of the spear out there, but this guy has the overview of everything going on. You're going to hear things that went well. You're going to hear about things that didn't go so well. But we will never get to hearing any of this, Murph, unless I ask you, are you ready to play the biggest, baddest, and as we see in this episode too, the most dangerous game of all, the game of crime?
Absolutely. So everybody get in, sit down, shut up, hold on. You're getting ready to hear a story about an incident that I wasn't even aware of, a terrorist attack in San Bernardino, California. So Eric, tell us what's going on, brother.
All right, you guys, you players, you playerettes, dudettes, amigos, everybody out there in between. Hey, we have got part of a family affair going on here because the name McBride is synonymous with several things from, one part of the country to the other. But we've got Eric McBride here. We did a good intro with you, Eric. But hey, first of all, welcome, my friend, to Game of Crimes.
Thank you.
That's
and
it.
You can
Thank
see
you.
he's a man of many
great
words.
to be here. You guys
Happy
are
to
studs.
be here. Glad to be here. This is outstanding. I love to be here.
He still hadn't quite figured us out yet, Morgan. He's like, who are these two guys?
I'm still a little starstruck. I don't know.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't know about that.
No autographs, please, and no pictures.
Right,
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
Hey, dude. Well, we actually caught you when we turned this on. I looked. It's like you're at a training session somewhere, and I looked at your unmade bed. I'm going, that would never stand. Weren't you a Marine formerly on active duty?
I was. I spent 6.5 years in the Marines. Yep.
So why is your bed unmade, Marine?
Oh,
you know what? It seems like the further I get away from the Marine Corps, the less and less of those habits that I lose.
You're able to get rid of them, right?
Yeah.
Well, hey, this is me saluting you. My son-in-law was a Marine formerly on active duty. Actually served in the Second Gulf War under Mattis. He was over in Afghanistan. So, but we're going to talk about that. But as we do with everybody, Cosa Nostra, thing of ours. How did you get started in this thing of ours? Were you like hanging around one day and you just decided to shoplift some stuff and the cops arrested and you thought, hey, I'd rather do that than go to jail, which you won't do these days. But back then we used to go to jail for that stuff.
I didn't necessarily grow up in a family of cops. My dad, neither of my parents graduated high school. My dad was a truck driver. And I do have some family legacy on my mother's side, on my maternal grandmother's side that were police chiefs and the last frontier U.S. Marshal in California and so forth and so on. But my interest...
Whoa. No. You don't skip past that. The last frontier marshal and so on, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Whoa, wait a minute. Let's rewind that a little bit. What was the last frontier marshal in California?
I think it was, at least that's on the U.S. Marshal's website. That's how they classify it. And that he was the last Western frontier U.S. Marshal. And it was he was prior to that, he was the Ventura County Sheriff. I grew up in Ventura County, or in Ventura itself. And our family's been there since the 1870s in Ventura County, and up in Ojai specifically, a lot of them, which is a small little town up in the hills. And he became the sheriff when my grandmother was a young kid. She was, I think his side of the family was cousins to my grandmother, and became the Ventura County Sheriff, longtime serving county sheriff, and then was appointed as the U.S. Marshal for the Western United States. And then he has another relative that was the police chief in Oxnard and stuff. So there is a little bit there, but it was several decades before it became to me and my brothers, and it became cops.
Yeah, now your family is like all over Southern California in law enforcement, right?
Yeah, we got quite a few members at the Los Angeles Police Department. I have a cousin that worked for me at San Bernardino PD, and then my daughter works there as a civilian investigator. And so, yeah, we have a lot of family members that are police officers.
And I can see the family resemblance.
What's funny is every time I see someone from LAPD, they kind of stare at me at first and they look at me. Yeah. And then they go, "Are you a McBride?" He goes, "Is that obvious?"
Well, it doesn't help when the other McBride is on TV all the time too. So, true. Him and I have swapped spots on Fox and some other stuff, but yeah, so
I kind of decide by their reaction on how they ask whether I want to actually acknowledge it or not.
You got a couple of nieces in there too, right?
Yeah, I do. Both I have two nieces that work for LAPD as well. Yep, absolutely.
Wow.
Well, man, it's when we said Cosa Nostra, thing of ours, this really is the family.
They decided to move in and take over.
But going back to that, I never, sure, I watched the cop shows. I think as all kids did of my era, like Chips and SWAT and all that stuff. But that wasn't
Thank God you didn't mention Miami Vice.
No, never. That was kind of a little bit later. They weren't real cops. Yeah,
give me a break.
There you go. There you go. Ha ha.
But I wanted to be a Marine, and I always did, and so much so that I graduated high school early. I had to take a couple classes at a continuation school to get enough units to graduate early. So I enlisted when I was at 17 years old, and I was a junior in high school. And there's a little bit of an interesting story on that. But anyway, so I went. No. You don't. Well, I have to get to that. So
okay.
So I go down to the MEP station, and I had to get a will grad.
Define the acronym.
It's I can't remember what it's the military processing place where all the recruits go to get your physical and all that stuff to go into the military. And it's MEPS. I can't remember exactly at this moment when you put me on guard like that to remember what it is. But so since I wasn't a high school graduate, I had to get what they call a will grad letter. And that's basically saying that he's a high school senior. He's going to graduate within a year because you could do a year deal at entry. So, but I was a high school junior. So I took the letter down to the high school. They crossed out senior and they wrote junior. So I go down there and I'm enlisted in the Marines and I want to be in the infantry. So I go through the whole day. It's a whole day long process. I get the final spot and the master gunnery sergeant, master sergeant in the Marines, whatever he was at that time, says, "Hey, everything looks good, but are you a high school junior?" And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, "Well, we don't enlist high school juniors. You have to be a high school senior or senior status." So they sent me home. My recruiter said, and I had a good relationship with my recruiter. And he's like, "You're a failure. You failed. I'm going to call you McFailure from now on." So
the indoctrination starts early.
Yeah. So we schemed, and back then, I couldn't believe the stuff they got away with. Now looking back, almost 40 years, but the recruiter used to give me the keys to the government car, and I used to drive all over town doing errands for him and stuff like that. I couldn't imagine doing that and giving some 17-year-old kid the keys to the government ride and letting him drive around town. But we waited about a month, and the recruiter says, "Hey, go back down there to your high school. Tell them this is a federal form. They cannot modify it, line anything out. All they can do is fill in the blanks." So I go down there and see the high school counselor. I said, "Hey, all you can do is fill in the date of when I'm going to graduate." So they did. They didn't cross out senior, but I was still a junior. And so I went back down to MEPS, did the whole thing, and I get to the very end, and the master said, "Hey, weren't you here about a month ago?" I'm like, "Yes, sir." And he says, "Were you a high school senior or junior then?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, it says you're a senior now. Sign right here."
So, there you go.
So that was it. It was off and running. So I was on.
Raise your right hand. Repeat after me.
So I was on delayed entry for a year. I was so motivated. I couldn't wait. And then I went to boot camp. But flash forward
what'd you do for that year, though?
I finished up my that summer break, and then went to the first 6 months or the whatever months of that first semester of my senior year of high school. Graduated midterm, and then 2 weeks later, I was in boot camp. I graduated boot camp before my class graduated high school.
Wow!
I was in infantry school.
Yeah, MEPS is Military Entrance Processing Station.
Yep. So I was in infantry school when my class actually walked across the stage and got their diplomas.
What year was that?
1985.
Wow.
So,
Dang.
But I was in the infantry. Fortunately, I got the MOS of 0352, which is an anti-tank gunner. So I got to ride. Back when I first went in, it was Jeeps, and then the military transitioned, the Marine Corps transitioned over to the Humvees, which was better because when it was raining, we had cover over our head. But so I did multiple tours. It's funny. I went to boot camp in San Diego, but they sent me to infantry school in North Carolina. And then I thought, well, I'm going to be on the East Coast. And I got my first orders, and they sent me to 29 Palms. And 29 Palms is kind of a miserable place to be as a 18-year-old.
We've heard that from other guests who were former Marines formerly on active duty. It's a shithole.
Yeah. So I looked around and said, "Hey, what's the first platoon that's going overseas on deployment?" So I jumped on that first deployment a couple months later. Before that, I went to Mountain Warfare School up in Bridgeport, and then went over to Okinawa. But as a Marine over in Okinawa, being specifically in my MOS, you get attached to different battalions that go on. So we went to Mount Fuji for 3 months. I ended up going to Thailand for a month, and because the Thais had bought TOW missile systems, and so we went over there to train them as advisors. Then I rotated back to 29 Palms. I got to get out of here. So I volunteered to go back to Okinawa for a year. Went back over there, got assigned to 9th Marine Regiment, and then went to Fuji, went to Korea operations, and then rotated back. And I had a year left. But fortunately, when I came back, I went to Camp Pendleton, and much better scenery than 29 Palms, and met my girlfriend who became my wife. And then I said, "Hey, I got to do something," and I intended to be a Marine forever. So I submitted my reenlistment package, and I wanted to go to Europe on Marine barracks, London, Rota, Spain, Naples, Italy. And the Marine Corps came back and said, "Hey, we've got all those billets filled. You can go to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, Adak, Alaska, Diego Garcia, Okinawa. And I'm like, I'd heard the horror stories from Marines that have been those places. I'm not going there. And so I talked to my career planner, and he says, hey, how about if I get you a spot as an instructor at the infantry school? I'm like, yeah, I can do that. Turned out that had been promised by somebody else to somebody else. And so I ended up being a game warden for a year. And the reason I took that was because I just got married that like the month I reenlisted, and I didn't want to go on deployment the first year I was married.
Mm-hmm. So at California game warden?
Yeah, on Camp Pendleton.
Okay.
On
now, so you were still a Marine then?
Still a Marine, yep. They had what they called FAP, Fleet Assistance Program at the time. And there were positions that the Marine Corps had that didn't have an MOS, and they would staff it with Marines from different various MOSs, and that was one of them.
So here's a throwback. I remember what TOW, because you mentioned TOW, T-O-W, mm-hmm. Tube-fired, optically sighted, wire-guided missile.
Yep.
Jeez,
it's an acronym. Yep.
You know, and you're talking about 29 Palms, and I've heard other people talk about it, and I'm looking at it, I'm seeing a lot of sand. It looks like a beach to me. I mean, what's wrong with that?
And they got this lake called Lake Bandini, and it's great. And Lake Bandini is where they send all the sewage. And
there you go.
110 degrees. It kind of
hell, you had all your shots, man. Don't worry about it.
Exactly. But
you Marines, you're just never happy. Come on now.
Yep. So I got back from that 1 year assignment as game warden. And I started talking to my brother, Jamie. I don't know if I know you guys have talked to him.
Oh yeah, no, we met Jamie several times. Yeah,
and he's like, Jamie has always wanted to be a cop, and he's like, hey, why don't you get out of the Marines and be a cop? Because I only reenlisted for 2 years, and the reason for that was that you can reenlist a year out from your EAS, your end of active service, and then so in a year I could actually submit for reenlistment. So I was due already to submit for reenlistment when I came back from that, and I said, no, I never really thought. And I had a kid. And I said, well, I never had thought about it. And he was telling me he was dead set on going to LAPD and stuff. So he talked me into applying. And every month LAPD comes out to Camp Pendleton to administer the written test. So I took the written test, passed it. I went down, got a.
Now, how did you pass the test? Did they have crayons small enough for you to use?
Being that it's LAPD, the bar is not very high. But, so I was fortunate, that for that, and I passed, the written test. But
put an X in the box. Raise
exactly,
your right hand. Yeah,
exactly. So. I passed, and I went down for my oral interview, and I got a 99 out of 100. And at that time, since there hadn't been a conflict, and I wasn't a combat veteran at the time, I didn't get veterans preference points. So I scored high enough to process, and I went down. They have a similar process of like the MEP station, where you go through these stations for a physical and stuff like that. It reminded me very much of going in the Marines.
Hey, Eric, hold on for just a minute. Murph and I got to just take a quick timeout. So, hey, Murph. Guess what?
What?
It is coming up on fall, and you know what fall means? Fall means college football season, baby. And look, I don't want to be messing around thinking about making something or having my wife thinking about making something. So guess what? Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, will help you fuel up fast with shelf-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, you'll eat well, you'll stay on track, and guess what? These things are fresh, never frozen, ready in 2 minutes. So all you have to do is heat and enjoy, and then get back to crushing your goals and your opponent, which Notre Dame will do again this season.
And West Virginia beat Pitt yesterday.
Yes, they did.
You know what? These guys, they have over 34 weekly flavor-packed, fresh, never frozen meals. They're ready to eat. They've got the Gourmet Plus options. These are ones if you have a more demanding palate. They've got lunch to go, so you don't have to spend a lot of time getting ready to go to work. They've got calorie-conscious options for people like me with their Calorie Smart meals, have less than 550 calories per serving. They've got Protein Plus meals with 30 grams of protein or more. They even have a snack supply that includes juices, shakes, smoothies. I've had their smoothies. They are fantastic.
They are. Oh. Man, I'll tell you, and that's the best part, Murph, is you get all of the stuff brought to your door. We don't have to get up, so we can continue to watch. Yeah, you can watch West Virginia maybe win another couple. I want to watch Notre Dame win again, right? So the way to do it, folks, you got to get this. You got to get Factor. Enjoy eating well without the hassle, really. Simply choose your meals. Enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered right to your door, ready in 2 minutes. No prep, no mess. Head to factormeals.com/GOC50 and use code GOC50 to get 50% off. That's code GOC50 at factormeals.com/GOC50 to get 50% off.
Yeah.
Okay, hey, let's dive back in with Eric now.
Got through that. They pretty much said, "Hey, you're going to be good to go." And more than likely, Jamie and I were going to go to the academy together. Talked to my sergeant major. He was going to give me a little bit of early release on TAD to go to the academy. And then I got orders to go to main site at Camp Pendleton to get screened for recruiting duty. And they're like, "Hey, you're going to recruiting duty." And I'm like, "Well, I'm getting out. I'm going to be a cop." Like, well, everybody tells us that. Which class you want to go to? So I picked the first class that was coming up like in January of 1991. And there's like, "Well, that's just before your EAS. So let's put you in the class after that." I'm like, "Okay, whatever." Well, just flash forward like a month later, and Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. And since I'm in a tank battalion and I'm an anti-tank gunner, and this is going to be a big tank battle, my unit got deployed over there very, very quickly. And so I ended up spending 9 months over in Saudi Arabia, and then was in Task Force Papa Bear, which was one of the main mech task forces that retook Kuwait City. So I was in that involvement. And then I sat over there.
Did you get to get involved in the Highway of Death attack where they took out all of that armor?
No, that was an all up in the air thing. They took that out, but amazingly, when I read the history of our task force and what we did, although I was not a tanker, the tactics at the time were the anti-tank because we were mobile. Now I look around and think, man, we were side by side with the tanks advancing forward, and we didn't have any armor, but we're involved in that stuff. But you look back, and it was the largest Marine Corps tank battle in its history. And and when you really look back, during World War II, when you had the last major tank battles, the Marine Corps was in the Pacific. And so there wasn't really big land warfare, maneuver warfare stuff going on in the Pacific. But in the Gulf War, we did. And it was the largest tank battle in Marine Corps history.
Wow, because the turning point in World War II was the Battle of Kursk, is what they called it, when the Russians finally got their act together and got enough tanks. And that's the first significant loss for German armor, in a battle. But yeah, the tanks have always factored in, on battles. But did you ever watch the HBO series, South Pacific?
I did, yes. Yep.
How about Band of Brothers?
I did. Yep.
Aren't those here's one thing I learned about, that, and also Saving Private Ryan. Basically, like 25% of the movie's budget was spent just on that opening scene on D-Day, when people are landing. They wanted it to be so authentic. And my dad was a World War II vet and a Vietnam vet. He got out before Korea came back in. But I'm a huge World War II buff. And when I see that stuff, I wasn't there, obviously. But it's like, but you're feeling it. You're going, oh my fucking God, just what these guys went through, and you think about the South Pacific and who was the Bastogne, John Bastogne, was it?
Yep. John Bastogne Medal of Honor winner recipient.
Yeah. He got the freaking Medal of Honor, and then they brought him stateside to do some, sell the bonds. And he said, no, I got to get back into battle. That's when he got killed, when he went back.
And I think he was killed on Okinawa. Yep.
Yeah.
Received the Medal of Honor for his actions on Guadalcanal, and then, was killed in Okinawa, Battle of Okinawa. And I've been on landing craft, during different operations, doing amphibious assaults, and in those very similar landing craft like they portrayed on Band of Brothers, and seeing that, and then having been in it before, going, man, I can't believe that those guys are heroes. That gate comes down and there's totally exposed to the machine gun
50
fire.
calibers, coming at you. Well, I had the honor of meeting, and I didn't know this for 2 years. The guy was so humble, but do you know the name Colonel Barney Barnum?
Kind of sounds familiar, but
he's a CMH winner from Vietnam, and he's the husband of the wife of. I was at a nonprofit institute. I was on the board, but so we go to a Christmas dinner down at Ruth Chris in Arlington, and what does he show up with? He shows up with the CMH around his neck, and it's like, you sandbagged me for 2 years. You never mentioned shit.
Right.
And you know what? I will tell you, it doesn't take long when you've got a CMH winner. The line at Ruth Chris. In Arlington there, it wrapped around the corner, went down the stairs. Every Marine, I think, within sniffing distance, within a stone's, even way out, outside, anybody within 25 miles, I think, was lined up to go meet him. What an honor to see guys
Absolutely.
like that.
Yep.
Well, back to you now, back to our regularly scheduled podcast. So You're over there for 9 months. When did you actually get into in-country, out of Saudi Arabia and in-country, and get into some fighting?
What was that? The ground or the air war started in January. January, where they started bombarding, and we started moving we were already very forward deployed at that time. The somewhat the speed bump in case the Iraqis came in, and to at least delay or prevent them from attacking further in. But we were close enough that they would drop every night. They would drop leaflets before the bombing campaign, and then they were dropping the 10,000-pound bombs on the Iraqis, and the leaflets would blow into our positions, and we'd see them. I have a bunch of them, and a lot of times after they dropped the 10,000-pound bombs, and the Iraqis got to experience that firsthand, that they dropped these leaflets showing the B-52 saying, "Hey, we're coming back tonight to drop these things again. But if you take these leaflets and go head towards the American lines and surrender," and I guess those bombs are so just demoralizing that they knew that would be effective. But
I saw those pictures. I remember seeing those pictures of them holding up the leaflets.
Yep. But those bombs, I mean, all the bombs, the ground just shook, crazy. And of course, before they started, we'd have to get in position just in the event that the Iraqis came forward or that we had people that would come across and surrender. But then we did the ground war actually in February. And, I still remember, we had a briefing and they expected us to suffer about 30 to 40% casualties. We were taking nerve agent pills, anthrax pills. I got inoculated for botulism and all this stuff. And then, then during the briefing, they said, "Hey, because amazingly, it's really cold in the wintertime. It was had a very low ceiling because it was drizzling." And they knew they wouldn't.
From California. Cold is relative. What do you mean by really cold? Like it got below 50? What?
Yeah, it actually gets cold with the wind and everything over there. It'll cut right through your uniform or your clothing that you're wearing, and it bites. But so they knew they weren't going to be able to get air in to medevac people out. So they said, "Hey, we're just basically going to throw them an Amtrak, which is an amphibious armored vehicle that can go land in the ocean. And we're going to send them back to the rear to the medical." But we knew that we were expecting a lot of casualties. We had to go through 2 minefields to get into Kuwait. But I remember lining up, and I have a friend that retired from the Marines. That a lot of my friends retired because I was a second termer, and they stayed in even though I got out. And I remember we were online getting ready to move forward, and it's in the middle of the night, the night before the ground war. And I walked over to his Humvee, and I just shook his hand and said, "Hey, good luck. See you in Baghdad, or see you in Kuwait City." And I asked him, not too long ago, "Hey, so do you remember that?" And he says, "Yeah, I remember that." And he went on. He ended up serving in, staying and going to, over to Iraq and Afghanistan and stuff like that too. But we moved in, and amazingly, it was, the Iraqis were dropping artillery on us as we were moving forward, shooting at us, but it was almost like they didn't know how to aim. And we suffered nowhere near the casualties that we expected. We lost some people, or at least, some people on our task force. We had some people wounded, I think about 10, 15 wounded in my company. But we were able to move forward and attack some of our, detectors went off for chemical and biological weapons, which we were told were false. But to this day, some people allege that they were just told that we were, but that stuff actually was, real activations. But we'll never know. I mean, that's probably secret stuff. But yeah, so we went in and we set up on the Kuwait International Airport, which was our objective. And they told us to stand fast that night because the Allied Arab forces were going to go and actually seize the airport for CNN. So we had to stand back while they went in.
Well, wait a minute. Seize the airport for CNN? This was a staged photo op?
That was a stage. The actual taking of the airport was reserved for the Allies and for the CNN. Yep. And we were there. We took all the brunt of everything before that point. So they were nowhere near us when the actual combat was taking place.
All governments participate in propaganda.
Yep, absolutely.
Oh boy. Well, it's like, what didn't they say MacArthur, like to get that picture, it was like 2 or 3 times, he had to redo it, waiting ashore, in the Philippines, coming back, and even the raising of the flag on Mount Suribachi, that famous photo, that was the one they caught was not the actual one that they did it before, and then they redid it again. So
absolutely. It's much smaller flag originally. They got a bigger flag and redid it.
Yep. Wow, man. So, but when you were there, did you lose any buddies? Not wounded, but did you lose anybody?
I did not. not in my company, not in my battalion, but it was a large task force, and I think we had an individual. They ran over a mine. There was a ton of mines, and he got killed that way. But there were. I think it was about 10. We had a formation before we came back where they handed out some Purple Hearts. And I think we had about 10 people in our company that got Purple Hearts. There were some Marines seriously wounded. There was an incident that I didn't observe myself, but there was some Amtraks with some infantry in it that was behind us. We were forward of that with the tanks and the tows. But we were bypassing. If there was an Iraqi that was unarmed, we were moving forward so fast. They said, "Just drop your weapon. Tell them to drop the weapon, and we'll keep moving forward, and let everybody behind us mop up the
Here,
POWs."
take this and go turn yourself in.
Yeah, and the people behind us were going to mop up the POWs. So there was some Iraqis that were surrendering, and there was some Marines in an Amtrak, and their lieutenant told them to dismount and take these prisoners. And right when they dismounted, a mortar landed amongst them and wounded a bunch of those Marines.
Mm. Yep. What, mortar from the Iraqi side?
I would assume so. I hope it wasn't our own, but
friendly fire. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know if it was or wasn't. But I'm assuming it was Iraqi mortar. But those Marines were wounded and obviously had to take back. But what's funny is, as you see the old pictures, and we had it on our Humvees as well, because you want room inside those Amtraks because you're just crammed in there with all your gear. You typically would hang your Alice packs on the outside. And the Marines inside, they said they would hear the pinging of the rounds off the light armor of the Amtrak while they're inside.
What's an Alice pack?
That's another acronym. And I can't remember what Alice stands for, but it's basically your rucksack, your
it's basically all
backpack.
Yeah, all your gear and everything hanging off the edge. Hey, now I know you keep mentioning tows, but were the javelins out then, or was that
javelin's a more recent thing? So the javelin, is my understanding, replaced the tow. So
yeah,
tow is just an acronym. Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't realize when it came out, but how? I got to fire a few when I went through basic. I went through Fort Leonard Wood Army side. We got to fire tows, but how accurate, or did you have a chance to fire a few of those?
Were they good? Quite a few of those, yes. Not as many as you would suspect, because they were about 10 back then. They were about $10,000 a missile, and I think about 12,000. But if there was an inert round which had everything but the warhead, it was maybe a couple $1,000s cheaper. So you fired more of the ones without a warhead than you fired with a warhead. And
why?
Since they were so expensive, because they're $2,000 cheaper.
No, I mean, but what would the inert? What would, without the warhead? What could you actually do with it? Would it just disable it, or
no? It just wouldn't explode at the end. But it's the same thing, and the purpose of the training was it's wire guided, and you have to guide.
Oh, you meant in the training? I was talking about though, like in actual combat though.
Oh no, they were all live. We had a combat load, so.
I was going, who's firing inert rounds?
No, in training. But no, we had so many missiles that we filled the racks that held the missiles in our Humvees, and then they gave us an extra 2 to throw on top because we anticipated such an engagement take battle. And we have guys in my company, a Silver Star recipient.
Wow.
That when we went forward, and I'll tell his story. He later got a commission, but at the time he was a corporal, and we were under artillery attack from the Iraqis, and he had a mule, a laser designator, that we could designate the target for like artillery or air bombardment. And he was trying to laze the Iraqi artillery, and it was just out of range. So he ran into the minefield to set up in a position to where he could laze that, and then successfully did that and destroyed the Iraqi artillery. And he received a Silver Star for that.
But then he's got to get out of the minefield.
Yeah,
a Silver Star, and then an ass chewing from the gunny right after that, right?
But the thing, obviously there were some that were still covered by the sand, but the Iraqis had set those up, and we were there for months, and the wind blows out there, so a lot of the mines were exposed. You could see them.
Oh, really?
But of course, there's probably some that were still covered, so it was dangerous. But for the most part, you could see them. But still.
Do they put those out in a pattern, or they just randomly throw them out there?
I don't know how they did it. I never laid any mines, but I'm sure there's a technique and a way to do it to cover an area. Mm-hmm. But they put out thousands and thousands of mines, all sorts of different, wherever they could buy them from over their course of the reign over there of Saddam Hussein. He bought mines.
Yeah. Well, Saddam. And so we had a guy on, Jeff Sandy, was an IRS agent, but he went over after the war. He did the investigation on Tariq Aziz, the oil for food, the huge scam that was. So that was interesting to realize. They weren't dumb people. They just weren't militarily. He was, that the war between Iraq and Iran for years is kind of what degraded them. But they were not dumb people. The stuff that they figured out how to scam hundreds of millions of dollars with the oil for food program. You just wonder why, but it's greed, man. You want one country, you want oil, and then pretty soon we got a little war going on.
Yep. And they had some, I'll tell you this, people look and they think that was somewhat a bloodless war over there in the Gulf when we were there. And while we didn't lose very many people, the Iraqis lost a lot of people. They had a tremendous amount of losses. I don't think that we ever kind of disclosed the amount of losses the Iraqis suffered during that ground campaign. But there was a lot of losses. For example, there was the second morning of the ground war, very low ceiling. You couldn't even see that far in front of you because of the fog and stuff like that. And I wasn't at the command post. We were on the perimeter. But suddenly they started seeing these tracer rounds coming out of the fog, and nobody saw these Iraqi tanks and this tank column coming out of the fog. And it was, shooting at our command post. But there was the lead tank, and it was the Iraqi tank commander, jumps off his tank, says, "I'm surrendering," but the rest of them are coming to attack. And then all of a sudden these tanks started coming out of the fog. And there was even, Cobras and stuff hovering over the command post, kind of like that scene when you see in Black Hawk Down that we're firing at the Iraqis and the shell casings are landing on the command post. But one of the guys in our platoon, several of them, this guy in particular got a Bronze Star because he had fired off around the toe at a tank, destroyed that tank, and then you're supposed to leave it armed, the actual missile system, because it cuts the wire when you open it up. Well, in his haste and excitement, he disarmed it, which left the wire intact into the missile casing, and he got kind of twisted in it. And he had to discard it, got rid of it, loaded another round in, and destroyed another tank. And but the Iraqis suffered a tremendous amount of tank destruction and loss, and we destroyed quite a few of those guys over there.
Wow, that guy that jumped off initially to surrender, that's leadership from the front, isn't it?
Exactly. He knew what he was facing.
But apparently nobody else got the memo.
Exactly.
Well, so you said you were over there for 9 months, right? So what was it like? Because it was, they called it shock and awe, right? It wasn't that long of a war, but were you surprised it ended as quickly as it did? We were. Just in a matter of several days. It was very little sleep, constantly moving forward into Kuwait towards the objective. And there was a lot of people that kind of wanted to continue on and go into Iraq. The Army hooked around north, I think it would be north of us, to cut the Iraqis off. But we pushed through and pushed the Iraqis back so quickly that the Army didn't have an opportunity to really cut off the Iraqi Army as they retreated back into Iraq. But there was a lot of people that said, let's continue on. Let's go to Baghdad, and I'm like, shades of MacArthur. Let's just keep pushing on, let's keep pushing past the 38th parallel and take care of this.
But I think the Iraqis had suffered such losses. In the media, there was no, you didn't see any reporters over there. There was no cameras, no video cameras, anything like that. And I've heard or read that Bush was kind of concerned about the amount of Iraqi casualties and that it would look like we were, piling on. And he was concerned about that. And that's one reason why he didn't push on. Plus, he had said the objective overall was just to retake Kuwait and give it back to the Kuwaitis.
Push Iraq out back to their own borders. Yeah. Wow, man. So you do your time there. When you come back, you still got another year and 3 months?
No, I was actually involuntarily extended. So I was more than likely going to go to the academy in October with my brother in 1990, but I got over there to the Gulf and they said, we're going to be over here to the duration. And so, a matter of fact, I went down, some of the guys who had picked that first recruiting class for recruiting school, all of a sudden they got orders. They had to pack up and they go back to San Diego to go to recruiting school. So I'm like, I wonder if I've got orders. So I go down to our personnel department and I said, hey, do I have orders for recruiting school? They go, yeah, you got a flight date in January and you're going back to recruiting school. And but then in December, I think it was, they did stop loss, which meant if you're in the theater, you're there till the end. And my actual EAS was in February. So February came and left, and I was still over there and had to stay for the duration. And it's what they call an involuntary extension at the convenience of the government. So I came back.
Does that get you any favors for later?
It does not, and nothing.
Of
nothing
course
extra.
not. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I come back, and the Marine Corps tells me, because I already re-enlisted once, sold a lot of terminal leave because I had just got married, and you can only sell back 60 in a career, and I sold back 30. So I had more leave than I could actually take or sell back, because the Marine Corps says you're going to be out in 30 days. Well, when I got back, I'd called LAPD. My brother, I got back just before my brother graduated the academy, got to go to his graduation at the academy. And LAPD says, hey, you're great. You're going to be in the next academy class, but we've got a hiring freeze. And that hiring freeze lasted for a year. And so I had to start looking for alternatives. And San Bernardino was recruiting on Camp Pendleton, San Bernardino Police Department. And I didn't really know where San Bernardino was. I knew a little bit, but I'd never been there in my life. And they were advertising on the Camp Pendleton newspaper. So I applied and literally got through the entire process in a month and a half. And my last day in the Marine Corps, my first official day in the police academy, was my last official day in the Marine Corps.
But you had no thoughts about extending and staying on with the Marines? You were just at that point, were you done?
I was done. I'd already had checked out. I knew that I was going to be making more money as a cop, even starting out, than I was as a sergeant in the Marines.
Well, that says a hell of a lot about the pay, where you can say, I'm going to make more as a cop.
Yeah.
Very few occupations you can say that about.
And the pension was better. I remember everybody was always sold on the Marine Corps that you're going to get 50% of your income for the rest of your life. And at the time I started in police work, it was 60%. So I was like, man, this is great. I'm going to get 10% more in my pension than I would have been if I was in the military. And obviously it changed over time, and I retired at 90%, but which is pretty phenomenal, I have to tell you. But
wow.
But yeah, so I started it overlapped my first day in the academy. I was still a Marine.
I just to put that in comparison, I did 26 years of DEA, and my retirement is 46%.
Yeah.
You're 90.
Being a Marine, retiring at 50% of what you couldn't afford to live on in the first place.
Exactly. It's funny. We'd have everybody wants to go to the federal agencies, the 3-letter agencies, because it's looked as the premier thing, and it's great. I don't want to say anything bad about those agencies, but oftentimes those guys would come. They're assigned to task forces out in California, working with the California cops, which we do make pretty good money out there. You get 90% of a sum that's far greater than what a lot of police agents make across the country. And they'd look at it and go, how much do you make? What's your pension? And they're just blown away.
Well, I was talking to a guy at LAS, Los Angeles Sheriff's Office, and if you did 25, I think you got free medical for life. Is that right?
It depends. That's the.
Were you under CalPERS or a different?
I'm under CalPERS. Yep, under CalPERS. But whether or not you receive medical benefits, it's dependent upon what you negotiated. Your bargaining group negotiated with your city or your county. So I got no medical. I go to the VA.
So. Yeah.
Oh, the height of efficiency in medical care. Yeah.
I have to say, I'm not disappointed. I go there and everything gets taken care of. I've been very happy with the service.
Well, it's the same. No matter what the diagnosis is, the prescription is the same. Take 2 ibuprofen and call me in the morning.
Right. Right.
I tell you what, I live in Orlando, and the VA hospital they have out here next to Lake Nona looks like something out of Gotham City. It is one of the most impressive buildings I've ever seen in my life. It's the nicest VA hospital I've ever seen anywhere in the United States.
Yeah,
I'd hope the quality of service goes along with the beautiful building.
Before I retired, we had a reserve, and we still have a reserve officer that's a doctor at the VA. And I asked him, I hit him up, and I said, hey, I'm thinking about going to the VA as my primary care provider when I retire. I said, how is it? And it's cut out the BS. He says, to be honest with you, he says, the last administration, he said, took to heart what the veterans said, and they spent a lot of money in the VA. He says, we're seeing even the patients coming here because they get such better care, because it's not a managed healthcare system. And so it's not like they're looking at cost and profit and stuff like that. The VA, when I have an issue, it's like they do every test possible. And the cost is not an issue. You don't have to go back to the insurance company and ask for approval. It's the taxpayers that are paying for it, and they just have a huge budget and they just approve it, and it just gets done.
Well, that's the way it should be.
Yeah. So I don't have any complaints.
Yeah, well, and it's come a long ways too from what it used to be too. But we got to take care of the war fighters, men and women, and some of these significant injuries. It's like you want good VA care. So your first day, you were still a Marine on active duty. So, but there's San Bernardino County, and then you were San Bernardino City. You did police. How big of a? Give us some context now. Let's start talking about this. How big is San Bernardino County? How big's the city? How big was your PD?
I can't remember how many square miles the county
population wise. Yeah,
the county is several million, but it's by landmass. It's the largest county in the United States. So it's bigger than some of the small states back east. It's just huge. Wow. It goes all the way from San Bernardino. To drive north to Vegas, I can drive for 4 hours and still be in the county of San Bernardino. And the same as
my God, out here in Northern Virginia. But you would in 4 hours you would go from Virginia through D.C. through Delaware through Maryland through Pennsylvania. You could do West Virginia. You could do all that in 4 hours.
Yeah. And the thing is most of the county is desert, so there's nothing out there in those areas. But it's just a tremendous amount of landmass. It's just huge.
It's over 20,000 square miles.
Yeah, it's huge. So the Sheriff's Department has one of the largest air fleets. I think they have probably 10, 12 helicopters.
They need to. It's like the Alaska State Troopers, man. You got to, if you're going to go somewhere, it's a 2-hour trip. Yeah. If you're by car, you got to cut it down. Yeah.
But the city of San Bernardino is located west in the western portion of the county, which is the large population base. So we have about in the metropolitan area for the city where we're at, just east of Los Angeles, about 50 miles. There's about 2.5 million police or population. So it's a large population area, but the rest of the county is pretty sparsely
So
populated.
About what, 2,000, 2,500 on the PD?
No. So the city itself, we have about, when I started, it was about 185,000 population. It's grown to about 230 now. But at the time, at the largest, the police department for sworn was about 350.
Okay, I was thinking of so you were talking about the metro area, those about like 2.5 million. Okay, but the city itself about 200,000. So
yes.
Well, I'm looking at the map here.
Yep.
I'm looking here at a map of the county, and it goes all the way to the Nevada state line
and the Arizona state line. Yep.
Wow.
Dang.
Impressive.
So let's talk about you as a youth, right? So you go through the academy. Are there any interesting stories we should know about you in the academy, Eric? Knowing that we have reached out to our contacts, to people.
I don't know that. Having gone through boot camp in the Marine Corps, which they considered that academy, police academy I went to, as a stress academy, but it's nothing like going through Marine Corps boot camp. Of course. And you got to go home at night, right? And you're off on the weekends. So with the most...
Just like Marine Corps boot camp.
Yes, exactly. The craziest thing that I'm standing there and, they're the first day, for example, you talk about that. And it's the first thing for me was it's July in San Bernardino and I grew up on the coast and it's like 105, 107 degrees. So it's super, super hot. And, but we're standing there in the formation and they're yelling, the TAC officers are yelling at us. And I start seeing a few people here and there pick up their stuff and walk off. They're quitting. And I'm like,
really?
I'm looking at these guys out of the side of my eye, and I'm like, are they seriously walking off? I said, they're getting paid good money. I got paid initially in the Marine Corps like $500 to go to boot camp a month. So and we're getting paid, several $1,000s. I said, this is a piece of cake. And it's surprising that, and some of those they weren't Marines, but some of them were in the military. I won't say what branch. I wouldn't want to disparage that. Sister agency.
We all know which branch.
But people would walk off, and I couldn't believe it that they couldn't handle the they're trying to pile on the stress. But to me, it wasn't really that much stress.
If they got upset because somebody yelled at them, what's going to happen when they get on the street?
Exactly, and that's part of the reason for getting yelled at is they're trying to get those people out before they ever get into.
Sarge, this bad guy hurt my feelings.
But for me, the academy. I mean, other than being, not that long, it wasn't anything that I hadn't really had exposure to before. I think they put me in charge one day to, as the class sergeant, and you're responsible for like getting people in the classroom and marching them to and from locations. And most of us Marines, when we got out there, we knew how to give the right face, left face, and forward march, and even know how to call cadence. And we got fired very quickly because it wasn't any fun, because what are they going to yell at? We knew what we were doing. But it's those people who are civilians that never had that exposure that typically stayed longer as a class sergeant, and they suffered more because of it. But, you just kind of keep that low profile in the academy. I never tried to, make myself known, kind of like what you try to do in boot camp, right? Shrink into the background.
Mm-hmm. That lesson I learned too, never volunteer for anything.
Absolutely. Although I did volunteer in boot camp for something, and it's a funny story. If we go back to boot camp, is after you do the rifle range in the Marine Corps, there's like a break, and they either go on mess duty, guard duty, or whatever. And so the first day, I can't remember what we were doing, but they had taken these Marines, these privates. They're not Marines yet; they're just recruits, and they had graveyard mess duty. And so one of my rack mates was one of those Marines, and one of the Marines that went on that duty for some reason couldn't do it. They needed to add it. And he goes, "Hey, I'm going to volunteer you. Go ahead and volunteer for this. You're not gonna regret it." So I said, "Okay, I'll volunteer for it." So as the mess hall is closing at night, we would go down there as the night privates for the mess hall, and still the drill instructor's there, everybody's going on. And then as soon as it shut down, everybody was gone. There was just basically a corporal in charge. And you say, "Hey, you guys can go ahead and sleep, do whatever you want, and I'll wake you up before they come back in the morning." And so we had access to like all the refrigerators, all the sweets and stuff. He goes, "If you want to make something, a burger, do whatever you want, you can do it." So we're like gorging ourselves on cake and cooking hamburgers at night, and then sleeping in the chow hall and acting like we were tired in the morning when they came back. And then you'd go back and sleep in the barracks during the day. So it's kind of a fun. Only time I ever volunteered.
Yeah, I made that mistake one time of volunteering. They come out and they say, "Hey, we need some drivers." And when I was going through Fort Leonard Wood, every now and then you would get asked to like drive a pickup truck of supplies from one location to the other. So stupidly, I raised my hand. I ended up driving a wheelbarrow for most of the afternoon, moving bricks and dirt.
Right. Got to be careful what you ask for sometimes.
I volunteered to co-host a podcast, and now I'm stuck with Morgan. Look at that.
Nobody asked you, Murph.
Well, I get a shot in when you can.
Yeah, you did. So let's get into your career now. So you're a fully sworn San Bernardino police officer. Everybody starts off working the road, right? So what's it like working the road in the mean streets of SB?
So I didn't know anything about San Bernardino, and but what I quickly found out is that San Bernardino is what we call a very busy city. And that first year I was on patrol, and after the field training program, obviously, but I'm on patrol, and that first year we had about 85 murders, so 85 homicides, and you're literally going from call to call all day long. And
was that a good number or a bad number for San Bernardino? I mean, what was the regular?
Well, the politically correct side of me saying even one murder is a bad number,
of course.
But far as for policing, as if you want to be a cop and seeing a lot of stuff, I can't say there in the course of my career in 30 years that there was ever very many true victims. I mean, there were absolutely people that were victims and shouldn't have ever been murdered. But for the most part, it's a very has a lot of gangs in San Bernardino, and this is gang members. And today's victims is tomorrow's suspect if they survive, and vice versa. So you're basically running from call to call to these gang members and drug dealers that have shot and killed each other, and that's pretty much what it is. And of course, in the early 90s, you still had the crack wars going on, and so it's just a tremendous amount of warfare between rival gangs over drug territory.
I just looked up about the crime rate in San Bernardino, and it looks like they average about 46 murders a year now. So 46. If you're hitting 81, that was quite a bit.
Yeah, this year they're down a little bit, but I think my last year were in the 80s, 70s or 80s, and that's just 2 years ago.
Who are the main gangs down there that you were dealing with?
So we have a lot of homegrown gangs. So you used to have the Crips and the Bloods, but we have the like the California Gardens, what we call it, was a Crip set. Then we had rival gangs that literally live like a block away, but they're blood sets. And then we have a lot of generational Hispanic gangs that you see. And of course, they're clicked up and somewhat controlled by the Mexican mafia. And as you guys would know, that you wonder how these guys in prison have control over these guys on the street, but all these gang members on the street know that at some point they're going to go to prison. And if they don't abide the rules, then they're going to pay the price when they go to prison. And they all
funny you should mention that. We just did, because of where we met your brother at and out at the Southern California Gang Conference, we just did our first ever two-timer, Ramon Mundo Mendoza, an OG Mexican mafia guy in prison. I mean, yeah, exactly. It's exactly what you're saying is how can they have control over everything? And dude, he laid it out. I mean, we in our second episode, we got into the homicides, we got into the way they control things, and it's like, man, they've got this figured out. They understand how to control people from womb to tomb, and
absolutely,
and keep that thing going.
Well, they know how to manipulate the politicians in California, also.
Big thing.
Yeah. So we just have a tremendous amount of gangs. A lot of the city is your traditional generational gangs. There's just a lot of them. And so we have a lot of shootings, a lot of other associated, robberies and stuff like that. So it's just a very, very busy city, and you get to see a lot of activity. You lose track. I mean, I've talked to cops who talk about the one homicide they've been to in their career. And there's very few in my mind that stand out. And, other than, if it was a quadruple homicide involving like some gangs, and there's some pretty famous ones, at least locally for us as cops, that we had. One of them was what we call the dead presidents, and it was pretty much a gang takeover. They invited a gang of associates, but they wanted a leadership change, and it was like a subset, but they murdered all the other leaders, and we rolled up on that. There was 4 of them dead, and then a couple other, in the bushes shot and stuff like that. And, but that was just nothing to get excited about. That was just another shooting in San Bernardino.
Wow. Just another day in paradise.
Yeah. And I would say you get somewhat numb, but it's, when you look at it as that's your job, we would expect to see that. And, unfortunately, we have officers that would leave on occasion to go to other agencies. And sometimes these officers weren't our most stellar officers. Sometimes they're viewed as being lazy. But when they went to the other cities and they got exposed to a homicide there, they were the ones in charge, and they were taking charge because they knew what to do. And I'd hear back from those chiefs, man, this guy came over here, man, he is one of our stellar officers. I said, that guy? And it's like, yeah, he gets to the scene and he knows what to do. He takes charge. But it's kind of like the expected, where I came from, and they had a lot of exposure to it. So they, a lot of training, so to speak, and these guys knew what to do.
Yeah.
Speaking of knowing what to do, let's talk about that now. Now, did you stay? So I want to talk about, we talked earlier about, we're going to talk about a couple things because we found out you have a nexus to the incident Alex Collins was involved with Chris Dorner. The people want to say former LAPD guy. I hate to say that kind of stuff because he didn't even make it off probation. I mean, the guy was not qualified to be a cop, but you were involved in that. And then we also want to talk about the 2015 San Bernardino terrorist attack, the 2 people. But up until that point, what was kind of your career path? Did you stay in uniform? Did you go to investigations? What did it look like for you going into before Dorner happened?
Yeah, so I didn't really have an active, I just was listening to it on the radio. But anyway, so yeah, I stayed in patrol for a number of years, went to some of our, patrol assignments like problem-oriented policing and stuff like that. And then got into the what we call auxiliary SWAT team, which not full time, but then with about 7 years in, I got into our gang unit, which also the gang unit at the time functions as our SWAT team as well. So you have that dual status, and did our gang unit for a number of years, and the SWAT team along with that. And then from there, I got promoted to detective. And at the time, one of the sergeants that they had a vacancy on the narcotics team wasn't very popular, and they couldn't get anybody to put in to be his number 2 in that unit. So I got the phone call from the captain, and she says, "Hey, congratulations, you're getting promoted to detective, and you're going to narcotics."
You just volunteered again. There you go.
And so I went direct from the gang unit to narcotics to work for that sergeant, and everyone's like, "Hey, sorry for you, man. You got to go work for that guy." And I'm like, turned out it wasn't that bad of an assignment. He was okay, but we have some funny stories about him, but. He's still alive, so I don't know if I should tell those. But
yeah, maybe not.
A little embarrassing for him.
You get those kind of phone calls, and you feel that little bump in the rear, and it's like, oh, here we go.
But I worked what we call our street team, so we're more about volume. So we were doing about 10, 15 search warrants a week. So we'd work all week with our informants, go out there and buy up the streets, so to speak, is what we'd call it. And then write the search warrants. And then on Thursday or Friday, start rolling out there and spend all day serving search warrants, knocking down doors and stuff like that. And so I got a tremendous exposure. And then we'd sometimes help out our majors team and do like rolling surveillances and stuff like that.
What's your majors team?
They would look kind of a longer length investigation. We're looking to get a higher volume of narcotics. So they would work maybe a case for a couple cases over a month, and then they'd get a much larger seizure of drugs and narcotics. Drugs and money, to where we're doing our search warrants, and maybe we're getting a quarter ounce of cocaine, or 10, 15 rocks of cocaine. But our intent was to keep the pressure on those street vendors out there, and we do reverses where we do a search warrant on a house and take it over, and then we'd have one of our officers start selling drugs, and we'd sell the cocaine to the guy, and then we'd arrest him for possession. And we'd line up. We'd have like 20 people in the back room at this house where we're doing this reverse operation. And then when we're done, to cart all those guys off to jail for possession. So it was kind of a fun assignment.
The original takeovers were invented by cops. Everybody talks about, we're doing tequila takeover night. No. Exactly. We did the original takeovers. Yep. Come on.
So we did. We had fun. It was a lot of work, a lot of hours. There's times when I lived about 45 minutes away from work, and we were always about, hey, no matter how late we're out, whether it's 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, we're going to be back at work at 8 because we ain't missing our overtime. We're not going to come in later because we're going to make sure we get paid all that overtime. So there were a few occasions when I slept in the office because I did the math, and by the time I got home, I'd get 30 minutes of sleep and then have to get back on the road to come back. And I'd rather spend it sleeping in the office. So we did that. And so I did that. And then my buddy of mine on the team that was the corporal or the detective on the other team decided to test for sergeant. We both got promoted to sergeant, and went back, of course, to patrol, working patrol on our swing shift, which is from 4 to 2 in the morning. And so that's the busiest shift, so to speak, for the most part. And worked out for a number of years. And I kind of got into politics, ran for city council and got elected, was a mayor of the city for a couple of years while I'm a sergeant on patrol. And and then I decided I wanted to get promoted to lieutenant.
Wait a minute. What in the hell? What? Did you accidentally ingest one of those rocks that you were, what the hell possessed you to run for politics and have a busy job in addition to your other busy job?
You kind of look around, and it wasn't obviously the city where I worked, but it was the city where I lived. And you look at these people up there and you go, man, they're doing stupid stuff. I can do better than that. And so I decided I know how to run a campaign, and I went out there, did it all, kind of bootstrapped it, and then people kind of noticed, and then all of a sudden, people started donating to the campaign, liked what I said, and got elected. And it was a great learning experience. I think I learned a lot about how to manage things and how to, how a city functions better. Because when you're a police officer, you really don't see the rest of these functions and know everything that happens in these other departments in the city. But as the mayor of the city, and it was a city of about 80,000, so it wasn't a small city. Wow. I got to learn a lot about municipal government and how it works. But I worked the weekends at the police department because I had a lot of meetings and stuff during the day and during the week, and that allowed me that flexibility. But you also learn the ugly side of politics and stuff like that. And I'm like, man, I need to get as far away from this as I can. And so I decided not to run for re-election, but also because I was hoping to get promoted to lieutenant, and that was going to change my work schedule and my commitment to the department, because I'm going to have to be committed a little bit more. And I did get promoted. But when I was still a sergeant, I did work IA. I was the sergeant in charge of internal affairs for a couple of years. And so I did that. But I looked at it as more of a learning curve, and you get to learn a lot about personnel and how the personnel matters work, which is, truly, if you want to be later be promoted and be an administrator, you need to learn. You can't just be the knuckle dragger on the street. You need to learn how everything works.
You got to have that's one of the best people I saw. They always make for chief is you'd find these people who've been through command school. They worked every major bureau in their department. They would go apply at another location, but they'd say, yeah, I've worked everything, admin, operations, investigations, all that stuff. You want somebody who's well-rounded. So for you,
obviously for me, and one thing, I was doing all that, and as I mentioned earlier, I graduated high school early, and I didn't have any college. And when I first started in policing, if you had a college degree, they're like, that's going to be the chief, because very few cops. In the federal government, it required you to have a degree, but not as a local cop. And so I quickly realized I needed to go to college. So I started going to. I did a program to get some college credits at California Baptist University, and then started picking up units at local community college. So I was going to school on days before I went to work, and to get my bachelor's degree. So I obtained my bachelor's degree while I'm doing all these assignments at the same time. So I would work go to 2 or 3 different community college, whichever one had the class I needed that fit my work schedule, and then knocked out my upper division stuff as well. And at the same time, having 2 very young kids and being married and stuff like that. So
brings back bad memories.
Yeah, exactly. So, flash forward, I get promoted to lieutenant. And then as lieutenant, I run out to the district. So we have the cities divided up into 4 sections, and each section has a lieutenant that's in charge. And you're kind of like the mini police chief, so to speak. And so I had 1/4 of the city, and I was responsible for that. And then the next evolution was to move out of that, because I'd done that for a couple of years. And they offered an opportunity. We were going through some budget. The city filed bankruptcy. It's one of those California cities that filed bankruptcy. And we had to cut some staff, but city of San Bernardino being what it was, they knew they couldn't cut cops necessarily. And they did, but not purposely. A lot of people left the city because they didn't know what's going to go on with their job, and they'd rather go find another job before they got laid off or something. But one of the things they did cut were a lot of the civilian positions. And one of those, we had a civilian manager that oversaw records and dispatch. And I always had my mindset that I wanted to promote. That was one of the reasons why I went to college. And I didn't think I needed a degree to do it, but that was something that you had to have on paper. But so they said, hey, we need a lieutenant to take on records and dispatch. And so I remember flashing back in the city filed bankruptcy, I was a lieutenant, and I'd actually applied for a position as a police chief out in LA County at a little city called Hermosa Beach. And I moved all the way to the finals on it. But I remember talking to the headhunter, and he said, how many civilians have you managed? And because as a police chief, you're going to have to manage civilians. And I thought about it. I said, well, not very many. And so when that opportunity became available, I thought, I'll take that, check that box off in my career path. And there was about 60 civilian positions that I managed. And so I thought that was a great opportunity to get that taken care of, and did that. Not any position that anybody as a cop ever wants to do is manage dispatch and records. And then it's a whole host of different problems when you manage civilian employees. But
let's talk about that for a second, because I know you weren't directly involved, but you were overhearing the radio traffic. But we just wanted to make a tie-in back to Alex Collins when we talked with Alex and the whole Chris Dorner thing. Just kind of give us an idea from the inside, because that was actually the sheriff's office that was dealing with
Correct.
a lot. But did the PD get involved? Were you guys helping out?
Yeah. So San Bernardino actually is the closest city and police department to Big Bear, and so that goes down, and kind of preceding it. If you reflect back, Dorner had come through Riverside, which is the next major city over from us, and where he had shot and killed one of the officers and significantly wounded the other. And we didn't know where Dorner went. So everybody's kind of like in the back of my mind, where's this guy at? Because he's came through Riverside, and which is pretty close to us. And we didn't know at the time that obviously he had driven through San Bernardino, because you have to drive through San Bernardino to get up to Big Bear. And then the events unfolded up in Big Bear, and we're listening to it because we share channels that we can both go to that we can overhear their traffic. And so obviously their officers were pinned down. So our SWAT team went up there immediately with their Bearcat. Matter of fact, it was used to do some rescues of some of the deputies that were pinned down. To this day, we have that same Bearcat. It has a ding on it that it got hit by Dorner. He shot it. But I'm listening to the radio traffic the whole time, and we probably had about 20 officers at least up there engaged in that incident up there to different capacities. And it was just, it kind of goes into the next incident we talk about, where you had this just uncontrolled response from officers that are just hear it on the radio. Some officers are driving from hours away, not even telling their command staff that they're leaving their jurisdiction and going up there. And it's kind of like an uncontrolled mess, so to speak.
Well, that definitely exacerbates the command and control problem.
Yep.
You see somebody out there with a gun, and all of a sudden you don't know, is the dude on our side? Is he Team America? What's going on here?
Yep. So our chief went up there. I was a lieutenant at the time, and I'm listening to it on the radio, and obviously in our dispatch center. And at the end, when at the final part, and I do have a little bit of a personal connection. Jeremiah McKay, I was at the time a member of. We had a kind of getting our Emerald Society, Inland Empire Emerald Society, up and running, and I was a member of that. And we'd have monthly meetings and stuff. And McKay was our bagpiper, and he was the officer that was killed up there. So
yeah. And that's, you guys go back and listen to that episode, man. That is just, it's heart wrenching to hear what Alex went through. I tell you what, burning that shit down with him inside of it still wasn't enough. I mean, I would have dug his ass up, shot him again, burned him again, and buried him for all the stuff he did.
Yeah. And being on the SWAT team, the funny thing is that you have to go through this incremental step before you throw in, go through all these lesser impacting tactics to get, people out of a barricaded situation. And at the very end, you throw in hot gas, which burns really hot. It's real intense. It's real dense, and usually get people to come out. But from that you're going to start a fire. So you usually stage the fire department to respond in when that fire starts. But I remember listening on the radio, someone, I don't know who it is, that all of a sudden I said, "Hey, burn this motherfucker down." And I said, "What did they say?" And all of a sudden they say, "Okay, it's on fire." So.
Well, but you think about it. So I think back to Chief Brown when he was chief of Dallas, and those five, the Dart and the Dallas officers were killed.
Mm-hmm.
And he used the robot with an explosive to take out the guy. And people, what'd you use? Dude, use of force is use of force. You shoot and kill cops. You are bought and paid for. I don't care if it's napalm. I don't care if it's a bomb. I don't care if it's getting your ass run over by a car. It's if it's time to take you out, it's time to take you out by any means available.
Absolutely. Yep.
And Alex Collins' episode was 24 for those who haven't heard it yet. It's very empowering.
Yep.
Very.
So, and I didn't know Alex. I've met him since then, but didn't know him at the time. But I knew Jeremiah, so personally.
And you want to talk about a recovery story about what he went through, the injuries he had, and what he's doing. We met him, like I said, we ran into him again out at the gang conference. The dude, he fucking physically fit as hell. He nothing slowed him down. He still has days with his drop foot and some injuries and stuff, but man, it's us saluting him again. Well, let's, cause that leads into it. What we want to talk about. So, there's going to be another shooting, and this one had a lot of impact just simply because of not only the number of people that were killed and injured, but some of the national security issues that were raised because of their use of the iPhone. So it's December 2nd, 2015. So, and you know what? We have a policy. We're not going to name the pieces of shit. So we don't name their names, but it was a man and a woman, designated. FBI called it a terrorist attack. So walk us through that day. What were you doing? What's your role? What's going on?
Yeah. At flash forward to 2015, I'm now the assistant police chief for the department. And on that particular day, well, let me go back a couple days before that, a few days before. And I'm in my office, and my executive assistant comes in, and she says, "Hey, I've got this." The executive assistant down at the IRC, the Inland Regional Center, is called, and she's got this strange voicemail on her recording, and she's wondering if she should be concerned about this. It's all in Arabic, and she was able to forward it to us. So I listened to it. Of course, I don't speak Arabic, so I can't understand it. So I call in one of our sergeants who manages the TLO program for us. a terrorism liaison officer program, which kind of gives some officers some training to kind of what to look for in the terrorist stuff, and kind of pass it on to the FBI and some of the federal partners. So I said, hey, can you send this off to the FBI, the JRIC, the Joint Regional Intelligence Center, and see if they can get this translated and let us know if this is something we need to be concerned about. And so he takes it, and I give it to him, and it's a couple of days later. I'm like, "Hey, have you got anything back yet?" He goes, "No, let me call him and see what's going on." So he finds out. They call him. And they say, "Yeah, it's a snippet from an ISIL website, and it roughly translated. It says, 'Danger, danger, beware, beware.'"
Hey players, that is the end of part 1. Part 2 comes out, as always, on Tuesday. In the meantime, go check us out at Game of Crimes on Twitter, at Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook and the Instagram. Also, go check out our website, gameofcrimespodcast.com. We've got a lot more information there, including our book list. Any book written by our guests will be listed there. In the meantime, go check us out also, patreon.com/Game of Crimes. It's where we put a lot more content you won't hear on our regular podcast. We go into a lot more topics, and folks, it is a lot of fun. So go check us out, patreon.com/Game of Crimes. In the meantime, everybody stay safe. We'll see you tomorrow for part 2.